Welcome to From the Ashes, the Dungeon Crawler Network podcast all about Ashes of Creation by Intrepid Studios. Bear witness to the rebirth of the MMORPG genre from the ashes of an industry that has left the gamers behind. I am your host, Aggelos, founder of the Dungeon Crawler Network and From the Ashes, and this week I am joined by my co-guildie Alpha Soul. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, man.
I had something else in my head when I started to say that, and then it stopped.
I was kind of wondering.
Yeah, no, that's what I wanted to say, but for some odd reason, I was thinking of another word, and it started to come out like, no, that's not it. Roll it back. Whew, all right. Anyway, now we're better. And also, we have the guild leader of Mythic, Gundle. How are you, sir?
I'm glad to be here as always. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, mate. Glad to have you back. He's filling in for Stormslords this week, who is away with his family doing a celebratory banquet for his son, who pretty much did amazing in a robotics competition. So, congrats to them. So he's out there celebrating with his family. So we gave him the week off. Didn't want to, but, he escaped from the slave pen. I guess that's how that works. And we're here, and we're going to go ahead and jump into our show. For this week, we got a pretty fun episode, I think. We're going to actually do away with the discussion topics for this week from our list, and instead we've decided we're going to hammer into our mailbag and finish up the mail that we started last week, because there's a lot of good questions in there that I think would be fun for the crew here to discuss and kind of mull over a little bit. And I also felt like, hey, some of these have been out here for a little while, so I want to go ahead and dig in and clear them out so that way we have a fresh mailbag going forward. Before we hop into the show, I definitely have to give a shout out to our newest patron supporter, Blaine Atkinson, over at patreon.com/Dungeon Crawler Network. Thank you so much for supporting us. You help us keep the metaphorical torches lit so we can continue to do what it is that we do. We also had a lot of Twitch subscribers this month over at twitch.tv/Dungeon Crawler Network, including Ishibu, Wrastler, Ikasugami, and Obi. Thank you so much for supporting us there as well. All that goes to support the network. And of course, all of our supporters, both on Twitch and on Patreon, get access to all of our shows early, up to, or actually at least 24 hours early, sometimes as much as 3 to 4 days early. So if you're interested in listening to our shows early, head on over and throw your support. Another way you can do your support is iTunes reviews. We had 3 brand new 5-star iTunes reviews this week alone. Thank you so much, guys, for hopping out there and doing that. We got a one from Valikis, the 5-star quality, absolutely the best Ashes of Creation podcast out there. This is a must-listen podcast for anyone following Ashes of Creation. Wow, thanks so much, man. That's awesome. Simply the best from Capacitor86. You guys make my week when a new episode pops up. You keep me connected to Ashes since I don't go into the official Discord that often. Thanks for keeping me informed. And finally, insanely enjoyable, a must-listen for any Ashes of Creation fan from Jabby Jabs 12. Thank you so much. Those are awesome. They help people know that we are a real podcast, that we say real words, and sometimes it matters. Definitely helps us out so much. And I do have to remind you guys that we are doing a little competition that I shouldn't say a competition, it'll be a giveaway where we're going to give away one of the new cosmetic items, or a package. I'm not really sure what we're going to do yet, but it'll be something from the Ashes of Creation store once we hit 50 iTunes reviews on any of the regional stores. So it's not just US. US is definitely the closest with now hitting 26, but any of them will give a review, and then that'll be open to all of our listeners, so definitely go check that out as well. All right, guys. That was awesome. Let's go ahead and jump right on in to the first couple questions. This is going back to Arkan from Germany once again. we did one of his questions last week, so we're gonna go ahead and jump into the other two that he had. First question is, as the most important point I have, will manufacturing skills also affect stats such as strength, stamina, strength or stamina, constitution, etc.? What manufacturing abilities do you think will be available, and how far will the item that we are creating be influenced by what we produce? Okay, guys. Now, it's actually funny when I first started reading this question. I know AlphaSoul probably will think the same thing as I do, but Ultima Online, my miner was buff as all get out in Ultima Online.
Yeah. It was jacked, basically, and that was a problem until they introduced that locking, because your miner would just get jacked while you tried to get money, and then, you just gain strength through the roof and lose your other stats.
It was because how Ultima Online did it with their skill system is that any skill that you used had a primary and a secondary attribute tied to it. And as you used and leveled the skill, the associating attribute, mostly the primary, I think that the secondary was affected somewhat, but it was kind of hit or miss with that.
Yeah. Mostly the primary.
But mostly the primary would actually raise up, and your primary stat was affected the usefulness. So like mining, your skill level would be one thing, but then the algorithm it used was also tied to the strength attribute. So you could have really high mining, but if you had really low strength, you would have a lesser yield because you were unable to break the rocks. But it was pretty funny to see my miner had maxed out strength stat just because as he was mining, that's all he would do was use mining.
Yep.
So I guess the real question is, do you think manufacturing skills are, I guess this could really even jump into crafting and gathering skills. Do you think they will be affected by primary stats, or do you think they'll have their own stats?
I haven't gotten the impression so far that they'll affect the primary stats. And again, don't quote me on this. I just have not heard your primary stats being affected by that, or the supplementary kind of like skills that come in that you can invest in.
Gundel, what are your thoughts?
I don't think they'll be affected in at least like the ability to harvest. I think like obviously your stamina, your strength, and that panning out in the wild, dealing with monsters that are near the object that you're trying to harvest is going to obviously play a role. Because they've already said, at least in one podcast, or not a podcast, but a stream, that they that a gatherer who doesn't do adventuring can still be a top tier gatherer. I think that those lines that open up through your gathering tree, or whatever the case may be, through those skill points that you can allocate, will in some way do that. Whether that increases the amount that you can harvest, or tier of that you can harvest, or whatever the case may be, I think that'll be more of the route that they go. That'll be a direct route rather than your obviously your stats, like your dex or your strength, playing that kind of role.
Right. And what I was thinking was, and this will actually tie into a further topic later, but the idea of your stats, like your character stats, we know they're going to have character stats. We've seen the window already. They're not going the Elder Scrolls route, like at least the Skyrim Elder Scrolls route and 4, where it's just like health, or health, stamina, magicka. They're actually going to have RPG stats, strength, constitution, dex, that kind of thing. But I think you were right on one of the streams. They talked about your race determines some of your stats, and then gear will augment going forward. I don't think you're going to see a change for skills of manufacturing, crafting skills affecting those stats, because then what I'm seeing in my head is Gundel will probably be able to chime in on this one, but I know in World of Warcraft early on it became a necessity, at least up until I think, was it Mist of Pandaria or later?
Yeah, it's at least missed.
Well, everyone had to, like, the min-maxed was 2 craft skills because of the bonuses that it granted. Now, it didn't grant bonuses to strength or stamina, but it created, like, an extra socket or, made potions last long. There was some benefit to crafting that eventually hit a point where people were going, the best min-max thing you can have is, like, leatherworking and jewelry crafting. If you're a min-max raider, that's what you did, because then you got like a shoulder enchantment from
yeah.
And jewelry crafting allowed you to create these big meta gems that no one else could put in. And what that did was then, like I said, it forced people into having crafting in order to be, that min-max character. Eventually World of Warcraft did away with that, but I don't think we're going to see the manufacturing skills affect us in that way, because I believe the way Steven wants this to work is crafting and gathering should be a commitment and not something that everyone has to take if you don't like crafting in the first place. That just means you have to interface with someone who does, right? So
right.
If it came down to the fact that if you're a blacksmith, you get more strength, well, then any warrior type character that relies on strength would then also have to level blacksmithing as well, so that they got the strength bonus. And I just don't see that. That's a very old school RPG and MMO tradition that's kind of fallen off. And while Ashes is looking to regain some of those, don't become disillusioned that Ashes is some old school MMO. Now, we cover old school MMOs, so I'm not saying that is a negative thing, but there's some MMOs, Pantheon, Saga of Lucemia, who are trying to recapture that more old school feel where crafting may affect stats like that. But Ashes is a modern MMO, so there's going to be a lot of, I don't want to say conveniences, because whenever I say conveniences, people think fast travel. That's not how the game's being built, but it's being built with a modern audience in mind, not trying to recapture that old school RPG audience. I just from everything that they've talked about and the way they've described systems, it's definitely a modern MMO.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. They might have like a little bit of your old school nostalgia like weaved in, but yeah, I think it's definitely going to be more of a modern take on the MMO.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and we know that from the influences that we can obviously see, ArcAge, a little bit of BDO in there, Lineage 2, those kind of games didn't have those aspects. Lineage 2 maybe, but BDO in them definitely did not. And ArcAge did not affect your main stats by crafting. Crafting was a secondary thing you did that often just meant you made money, not actually affected your character's performance.
Right.
What manufacturing abilities do you think will be available, and how far do you think what a person can produce will influence the end item? Manufacturing abilities, I don't know if they've really talked about this. And manufacturing, I'm going to say, would probably be artisan. I don't think he's referring to the processing, because there's 3 lines. There's gathering, which is just the raw gathering; processing, which is the refinement of the gathered items into something usable, like ore into ingots, or, flowers into dried flowers, whatever. And then the artisan then takes those and utilizes them effectively. I'm going to assume manufacturing means artisan class, not just processing. But processing, you could assume that whatever raw materials go into the artisan, there will be something for that. Not a lumberjack, that'd be the gatherer, but someone who ran a lumber yard would be manufacturing. A smelter's one, etc. Manufacturing, I would standard to say the standard stuff. Blacksmithing, which may break down into armor and weapon.
You can go any number of routes with that.
We don't know yet. It all depends on how detailed it is. I mean, the Elder Scrolls Online just got jewelry crafting, for the first time. But, World of Warcraft had it since BC. But before that, it was just blacksmithing and then tailoring and leatherworking and woodworking. But I know that they're going to also allow us to specialize more. So being a blacksmith is one thing. Being a swordsmith is different. Being an armorsmith is different. You know, they're going to allow you to specialize deeply into the lines, so that way you can kind of either be more of a generalist, a jack of all trades, or you can definitely specialize in one thing or another, sacrificing skill in those other areas. So they definitely wanted crafting to be something that you stood out for doing it. So
yeah.
I don't know if we can really talk about that. Does anyone have any other suggestions? I mean,
Go ahead,
Alpha. Go ahead, Alpha.
No, I was just saying it kind of, whenever I hear them talk about the crafting system, it really just does remind me of kind of like an advanced version of Final Fantasy's craft system, and not necessarily just execution, but how they laid it out in terms of how you could specialize and go further into certain lines and improve yourself in that way.
And you know, that's a great little bridge into the next question, which was how far do you think we can influence the end item? Final Fantasy was an awesome MMO to bring up for that, because as a refiner, now, given you were able to refine everything and craft everything, but as a refiner, when you smelted something to make a final product like ingots or thread or whatever, there was a chance, based on how well you played the minigame, that you were able to produce higher quality ingots and crafting materials. If you use those higher quality crafting materials, there was a much higher chance that you would be able to create higher quality end game items, or not end game items, end items, meaning like, hey, I just finished this and my sword is of a better quality. Even older games like Dark Age of Camelot, theirs was a little bit more of a RNG-based system, but it definitely had a quality. And if you got what was considered a masterwork item, which was 100% quality, those tend to sell for a lot because they had higher stats, you know? So that was something that crafters would always make. You'd be seeing crafters mass-produce items like crazy to try to get that masterwork item, which then sold for many, many platinum, you know, in Dark Age of Camelot. So I'm hoping that we see the refining process. If it's something that you can mass produce items or whatever, oh, I can make ingots for you. Well, if I do it better and I make higher quality ones, I think they should sell better, because an artisan who has, oh, look, I got an ingot of iron. Oh, but it's all pocked with slag iron. It's going to not create as good of sword as this one over here that doesn't have any slag in it. There's no inclusions. So, hey, awesome. I'm hoping so. Has anyone heard anything different?
I mean, the only thing that I've heard, I mean, once again, they've already said that they didn't nail down the crafting, at least to us. But I remember they were talking about the dial. Remember about that, where that you could change the stats for the items, and then you could potentially overtune an item, have way higher stats, but it comes at the risk of not completing the item. Like you end up just losing said items during the craft.
Right.
So I think that kind of touches on to what we were talking about here. And I think that the nice thing about that is it shows that they've already talked about how all items you can use in combat, doesn't matter like your class or whatever. So you could have that mage sword, which is all intellect versus, you know, strength for a fighter. So it shows that is a very strong possibility that you could mass produce said items, but also you'll have variants depending on it. So you'll have the int sword versus the strength sword versus the dex sword, or whatever the case would be.
I'm glad you mentioned the dial too, because that's where the processor, the one who refines the gathered items, could then start making a name for themselves. Because let's say you had that overcharge dial, right? Clearly, the better quality materials, if you're using just standard low quality materials and you turn that dial up, maybe the percentage chance that it fails is much higher. But if you use higher quality materials, that percentage starts going in your favor. So, I mean, you're still risking it. Then it's that risk and reward. Like, all right, I can, let's say it takes 10 ingots to make something. I don't know why. It's just an easy example. Well, it costs 5,000 gold for 10 normal quality, you know, the low quality ingots. But if I do 10 high quality ingots, which are now 20,000 gold per, you know, 4 times the cost, that what was a 50% chance now went up to 80. Is it worth the extra gold cost? Maybe. But then you risk losing all the high quality too. It reminds me a lot, again, Elder Scrolls Online. Remember their tempering system, where you had to use their tempers, their resins. The more you used, the higher chance that it would succeed. If you failed, the item was destroyed. But if you succeeded, then it would go up to the next quality item. I could see that happening where you have these different, think of them as different tiers. Instead of jumping from here to here, you had all those tiers available, right? So, in ESO, it was, you used the sharpening stones or whatever for a sword or what to get it up from green quality to blue, and then you used dwarven oil from blue to purple, and then, so on. But what if you had all those available, and just to increase the quality of the sword, it's like, well, I could use these green tempers and just make the sword. But if I use the tempering alloy, which is the legendary quality material in ESO, I have a much higher chance. That's how I'm kind of seeing the way that manufacturers or the processors will be able to affect the higher quality materials you use going into it, the better chance you have of that overcharge style succeeding, but at a greater cost. You may luck out with all crap items, I guess, and still be able to produce a good item, but your odds are not in your favor, to quote a famous movie. All right. So, yep. Last question from Arkan is, all right, so let's say I'm an example is I'm a master blacksmith. Do you think I'll have the possibility to, say, change the way a sword looks? And if so, how far? I'm going to let someone else say something because I don't know if I can say that or not. Gundle.
I mean, from what I understand of it, and they've hinted at it in podcasts about when you're crafting or when you're equipping items, they talked about the racial stuff, right?
Yep.
So I don't know if maybe it'll appear whatever race you are.
Yeah.
So like, say you're a dwarf or whatever, it'll appear as a dwarf version of that sword. To the extent of changing like the hilt or the blade or whatever the case may be, I don't see that being kind of what'll happen. I think that'll be more of like your dyeing and things of that nature, where you can start to customize that kind of stuff if you're able to dye your weapons once again.
No.
I hope we don't, because that would
now,
get wild.
ESO actually did pretty good. I was worried about that, but they, you're always worried about the pink sword of doom kind of deal. But they actually did really good. They allowed weapon dyeing, and it looks really good because, they're like, you can use any color that you want. And I'm like, oh, great. We're going to see pink because there's pink dye. But the way they tuned it is based on the metal itself. So when you use pink, it actually comes out as more of that rose gold color, not hot pink.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that actually looks pretty cool now. It kind of looks like a bronze sword rather than a, just pink sword. But they did pretty good with that. So if they're able to keep that realism, I'm not really too worried about. But that was actually what I was going to say, Gundle, and I couldn't remember if I could say that or not. Due to the fact that it's an indie studio, I know they said that when armor and weapons drop, it's just going to drop and be like chainmail Holbrook. If you put it on as a dwarf, it'll be in the dwarven style. If you put it on as a Kalar human, it's Kalar human. If you put it on as Valoon, it's Valoon, and so on and so on and so on. So I don't know. I highly doubt at any point you're going to be able to adjust the way the sword looks, besides maybe making a different type of sword. Maybe they'll have different types of swords, like the Wielder, which is the big two-hander, or something along the line. And sorry if I butchered.
Oh, that's how you pronounce that?
Sort of. I've listened to it before, but it's definitely a German word, and I should know it.
Yeah.
But is it Zawahider? Anyway, I'll try to pronounce it later. But yeah, you have those, and then maybe you have a Claymore style. You are then going into more of a short sword, then a long sword, a rapier, a hand and a half. They may allow you to do different ones like that, which then also change how you're using the item. You know, because you would use a hand and a half different than you would a short sword or a normal long sword or a rapier. You would use even different from that. You wouldn't use a rapier and a shield most likely, but maybe that's what you'll be able to do to affect the look of it. But based on what we know so far, when you craft a sword, it will just be long sword, bastard sword, you know, rapier, and then it will change based on who's using it. So I don't think you're going to be able to affect the look of your gear that much at all. Hopefully we're wrong, and that might be just an early assumption. Who knows? Maybe they'll be able to figure out how to do that. But I know modeling and changing gear per race can be expensive. I know ESO does an amazing job with their motifs. Their later ones more than the early ones that look like they're just mesh painted on. But they also are a AAA studio with a very large budget. So take that for what you will. All right. So, Arkan, thank you so much for the email. Again, if you're interested in sending the show an email, please do so over at dungeoncrawlernetwork.com. Click the Contact Us page. They'll bring up a little contact form where you can select from the ashes and therefore leave us an email, and we will get to it. Because after tonight, I think we'll be pretty much all cleared up. Finally, we had one from Mike Thomas. Goes, hello, Aggelos. I was listening to you guys talk in an email about smuggling. This was a long time ago, like episode, like in the teens, we'll say, somewhere in there. So this was a while ago, and I apologize for taking so long to get to your email. It's just like we had a big flood of news, obviously, over the past few months, where we always had something to talk about. And now we're starting to hit that slow point where we're not getting as much news as we get closer to Alpha 1. And so we finally got to it. Sorry about that, Mike. But again, thank you for sending the email. Anyway, I wish I could remember what episode it was, but it's been so long ago. That way we could actually reference it. In one of them, we talked about smuggling. Anyway, smuggling. I think of this as bringing in goods that are not allowed, typical of a thief maybe. So I'm actually going to read the whole thing, and then we're going to talk about smuggling. It's a very long email, and there's a lot of questions, so we're going to try not to get lost in this, but we'll do our best. So cool. He's bringing up the idea of smuggling, because I know we talked about smuggling and how we think it may work in Ashes, and I remember the conversation briefly, how we talked about how smuggling really only worked in the idea of a siege environment. But sieges in medieval times, they weren't like what we see in the movies with like the trebuchets and stuff. Like more often than not, a siege was the army sat outside your gate and picked their toenails and just didn't let you out, and then you eventually starved over months. That's what a siege was. There were times where they launched catapults and stuff, but it was just actually easier just to surround the city, not let anyone out, and let you all starve to death. You know, that's how sieges worked. So smugglers were a way of being able to bring in contraband items. This, of course, also affects countries or areas where items are not allowed. So then you'd have people, you know, the black market kind of deals smuggling stuff in. But this particularly, we talked about smuggling in a siege environment. So he goes, what ifs? What if two nodes entered a war with each other? They may stop all trading with this node, if that's an option within the controls that are given. So what if two nodes are at war with each other? Okay, so let's start there. I know I was going to read the whole thing, but it might be a little too... As I started to look down over it, I'm like, no. I get the idea here. So he's like, what if two nodes are at war? The idea behind this is you have merchants, right, who are like, I didn't say, you know, the conscientious objectors. I didn't approve of this war. I still want my goods. What about that? Do you think there would be an idea of smuggling? I don't know, because my idea is from a caravan side of things. That's a system. They've even talked about it's a manual system where it's not like you just put a card in and go. It's actually you talk to an NPC to kick off a caravan, and then you launch these resources. I personally think that system would probably just be disabled during a node war, like a siege, not a node war.
Yeah, I would imagine something like that. I mean, so in the context of a siege, I think smuggling works. So what I'm actually going to say is based on I've actually read that email.
Oh, good.
And how he goes down to describe what he is thinking, but I don't think it works only because I always look at these things from an exploiter type lens, if you will. How can we abuse this system, right? And I think if you're smuggling things and you say, okay, these items are worth X amount more now just because they're illegal contraband, I think it opens it up to a system where people are going at war with each other on purpose so that they can sell each other goods at jacked up prices, right?
Yeah.
But in the context of a siege, I think that works a little bit better because it's a one-time event, and I think it works if your resources are somehow capped and you could potentially get more resources to do more things with it. But I think the concept of smuggling is just tricky in any MMO for that matter.
Yeah, I could see it working to a certain extent, but the way that I see it working is more or less when a siege is triggered, you have a black market that opens up. You're somewhere in the node, right? And that point, people can go to that node, and it could be against another node which they have an alliance with or something, right? And they can still be gaining access to either resources or gear, whatever the case may be, for that limited time, but it'll be at a premium. I could see something like that, but I don't see like an individual smuggler being able to influence a siege through smuggling, in the sense of gathering goods or sending it a caravan.
Right.
Unless they do something kind of like how they did that trailer where that thief or predator climbed up and gathered and caught something.
Right.
From that siege battle.
But the big question here is, again, I'm looking at this, I would love if it was 100% like real to world, but it's still a game. In real to world, a siege would take months, like literally months. So smuggling would be something that would make sense in the idea of a node war. But if a node war is only a matter of hours, you know what I mean? Like, I couldn't imagine it lasting more than 10 hours, unless it was like the old Altric Valley, which is possible. Hey, whatever, it could last for a long time, but eventually it would cut itself out. The only thing I could think of, and the thing I thought, what if you're, for a defensive thing, okay? Say you had defensive siege equipment on top of your nodes. And I'm going back from Elder Scrolls. You could build the siege equipment and you could put up siege on the walls, but it was destroyed, but they still haven't breached your walls. But you ran out of resources from the city. I guess some people could bring it into the city so you could continue to build. If the siege lasted long enough. I don't see a point, that's the wrong phrase. Not that I don't see a point, I just don't think a siege is going to last long enough that you would run out of stockpiled city resources to build siege or repair your walls. It's not impossible, but my thought is if it took 6 months to build one of these cities or whatever, and then you knew a siege was coming, I can only imagine the people who are trying to defend this node would be stockpiling resources as much as possible to make sure that when the actual first shots were fired, that, they were as prepared as they could be, And given how the node is supposed to function, and I don't imagine that even a full day of you using resources would be enough to deplete it.
The only thing I could see kind of tying into what you were talking about there is depending on how in depth the people that are running your node are, and depending on how far they push like caravan trading or alliances with other economic nodes or other nodes in general, there could be a way for you to gather goods while going into siege if you've spent enough points and enough resources into that mechanic. I could see that being a possibility. And then you'd also have your attackers having to fight those caravans coming into your thing. So I guess in a way you would get your smuggling because you would have it during the siege and goods would be coming in through whatever way possible, whatever way that they want to design it. But I don't see it, like you've said, when you only have a siege for a certain amount of hours and not days or weeks, it really limits that window for when people could even attempt to smuggle and smuggle in any resources, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's definitely my thought of it. Like as we sat here and talked about it, I'm like, well, yeah, I guess smuggling would make sense if, for instance, you ran out of resources. I can't see a node running out of resources in even up to 24-hour sieges. And even the Ultric Valleys of days gone past World of Warcraft era maybe lasted 10 or 12, but I can't imagine even in that amount of time it would. People eventually have to go to work. They get tired, they log off, and then, hey, you see a swell in forces, or whatever, because it's like, oh, the attacking side all logged off because they had work the next day. Or, oh no, the defending side, they're, I don't know, EU or Oceanic people woke up now or whatever. I know I said that from a North American side, but, oh, they have players from different time zones. They just logged in. Now we're screwed because all of our people just logged off. I don't see it going for the weeks where smuggling would be useful. It could happen, but it's highly doubtful. What if a player could enter into a contract to trade essential goods with a node that their node is warring with? He would be considered a smuggler. He could smuggle needed goods to the node for big dollars, premium, or big premium increase for the trouble. So, okay. So, like, if two nodes went to war, an individual person doesn't want to give up on selling their goods to the warring node, even if during that declaration period, which could be a little while, they would be gaining benefit from that. Yeah, I could see that. But it would all depend on the system. Does the system, when a siege is declared, does that mean you're unable to even generate a caravan? Because, once again, I don't think it's buying a pack horse and loading it up counts if it's not generated from the system.
Right.
I'm pretty sure whoever's running the city decides if caravans are running or whatever the case may be, right? Because they're in control of most of those systems that the node has. So, let's do this just for the sake of the argument. Let's assume that the system never shuts off, okay? Or that they can't control that. It's like if someone generates a caravan, whoop-de-doo. Okay, just for the sake of argument. We don't really know. All of this could be null and void if caravans can be 100% shut off by leadership. Then what are you going to do? Because they've already said that as an individual player, you're not going to be able to generate enough resources on the economic scale that a node would need by carrying it by yourself. I mean, you can maybe offset a little, but, or maybe it could even be a system thing where you can't deposit resources, which I think would probably be something closer, unless it's a system-generated caravan. You know what I mean? If you're carrying stone, okay, you farmed it, that's for personal use. You cannot deposit it into a city coffers unless it's from a system-generated caravan.
Gotcha.
And I don't know. That's just an idea. Like, maybe Steven will allow you to carry it, and then you're just like tiny smuggler carrying stuff. But, for this argument, we'd probably have to make a few assumptions. So the assumptions I guess I will make is that the city only accepts from a system-generated, and that the leadership cannot control it if it comes and goes. So those are the assumptions we're going to make for this.
Well, so actually, let's follow it down just one more level. Like, with smuggling, we're talking about the positive sides of it. What about what happens when you get caught? Do you lose your business? Does the node retain the right to demolish your business? Or how is that determined?
I almost feel like Steven has said the leadership will have the ability to brand someone as an outlaw, which means then the city guards would attack them.
Right.
So if the leadership of the node found out that, I was, Gundel is sieging our node. Alpha Soul, you are the person who's controlling the node, you and your guild, which is actually my guild, our guild, I should say. But we're separate in this case. Your guild controls the node leadership, or you're part of the leadership. I feel like I'm still going to sell to Gundel because Gundel's like, dude, I'll buy you stuff. And I'm like, ooh, I like money. So I'm sending him items. You would be able to, if I were caught, you would be able to brand me as an outlaw, and therefore, and this would actually be interesting. I'm curious if you're branded as an outlaw, do you lose, well, if you're branded as an outlaw, you lose citizenship, which would then mean that you would lose any property you own, because that's citizen only. They've already said even apartments, you have to be a citizen of a node to declare, to be in there. So they would confiscate your property.
Oh, well, what about the bounty hunter system too, right?
Well,
because if you're branded as an outlaw, would the bounty hunter system at that point kick in as well, right? I don't think it would, because that ties to your corruption part.
Yeah,
but
I think that's tied to corruption. The outlaw would just be the fact that you wouldn't be able to deal business in the city. The only thing I'm worried about, and this actually springing a whole other spawn of questions.
I think I know where you're going.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay. They already said housing is going to be a premium in node housing because there's only so many spots. What if you were elected to guild lead or the node leadership and you're like, I really wanted that mansion. Banish you, and then they lose the house.
Exactly. There's who says that this system doesn't mean that you can't just ban anyone for any capricious or whatever reason may be, and have them lose everything that they have in that node.
I mean, in reality, we've heard of people doing that in the past. I mean,
it's happened.
I don't know if you've watched the show Vikings, but in the very first episode, a guy got sentenced to death for murdering some guy, and he's like, he told the Earl, like, but you knew I had claim to the land, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're. And then at the end, then it found out, oh, well, the Earl just claimed all that land since the guy's dead. The guy who owned the land is dead. He has no family. The guy who had right to the claim is now also dead, so I'll just claim that as my own. We've seen that happen. So we have historical cases of people claiming things that weren't theirs by banishing. Heck, I'm not even thinking of David and Bathsheba with him sending Uriah into the battle to die because he wanted his wife.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've seen that happen, but from a gameplay perspective, we know that happened in real life. Bringing it back into a game and an exploitable thing, do you feel like they would even allow you to do... Like, the outlaw system sounds like both awesome and very exploitable. Alpha doesn't like the fact that I got that mansion on the hill because he has a mansion, but he wanted that mansion. I want that vineyard over there, and he won't sell it to me, so why don't I just banish him as an outlaw, and then I can take it because he can't stop me.
I mean, I like the idea of it just because it breeds conflict, and then therefore that person that got banished would probably rise up against that node, right? And then cause that conflict to escalate, obviously.
Sure.
Boy, from a gamer perspective of having that fear of that mayor or whatever being able to do that and have that much power, I think is too much power in their hands, because we've seen it so many times that kind of systems do get exploited, and they get exploited frequently.
Right. But I mean,
I don't think Steven would allow that to happen.
Right.
At least I hope he wouldn't.
Yeah. I'm really torn. I both like the idea, and then I also hate the idea. Because you're right. It would generate conflict of, dude, that guy just banished me from that node. So
the only way I could see it being fair is, say the mayor does do that and kicks him out, right? The deed goes to the mayor. At that point, if the guy sieges and kicks the mayor out, he gets his deed back. I could see that working. But that's the only way I could see it where it wouldn't be super exploitable.
Yeah. But see, here's the problem though. Even if you siege there's two outcomes here. With that node that we know of, if the node was sieged, is it de-leveled or destroyed? If it's only de-leveled, the person who now owns the property now has a lesser property, because remember that it loses its size. But they would still own it. They would still control the node per se, right? Unless all leadership is dethroned after a siege. Or the node's completely destroyed, and then it's the idea of, if you don't play the way that I play, then I'm taking my ball and going home and destroying your node, and then no one has a house, you know? Like,
yeah, so yeah, that's where I think the rabbit hole goes too far, and with the balance of power, right? I think they can't allow that to happen, because you give people the ability to exploit it, and they are going to exploit it.
right.
And they'll do it to the full extent that they can get away with.
You also have to remember it is a game, and while I do like the idea of those consequences, some people will do it just to be a jerk. Because there's really no consequence. Yes, there's in-game consequence, but what kept people from doing it in real life? Now, it didn't always work, but what kept them from doing it in real life? They didn't want to be drugged to the Tiber and thrown in the water like so many Roman emperors were, you know? Like, there was real-life fear that a mob's going to show up at your door, and it doesn't matter if you control armies. If they're not outside your door and there's an angry mob with torches and pitchforks, you're getting beaten, stripped, put hooks in your back, and drugged to the river and thrown in. There was a fear of that. There's no fear of that in a game because it's a game, right? So I could honestly see that happening a lot more just because I want to be a jerk about it.
I think that's kind of what Steven's also hoping for, right?
Sure.
Where because that breeds that conflict, like we're already talking about.
Yeah.
That mayor's a dick. He's increased the taxes too high. Therefore, we're revolting, right? The peasants or the crafters or whatever the case may be.
So
go ahead.
I'm gonna bring another game in as just a point. Shadowbane.
Ah.
Okay.
So Shadowbane, what they had discovered, towards, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with the game, it was a PvP-centric game that relied solely on PvP, essentially.
Yeah.
Right. What they found and what they hoped to happen was that as people lost battles and as people came in and maybe got their face stomped, that they would go back, they would gather some other people, come back even stronger, present another challenge. But in actuality, what ended up happening was, because of its pure hardcoreness, the larger and successful guilds essentially drove everyone off their server, basically, with their ruthlessness.
Yep.
Right? And people didn't come back.
There was
and
no
once people
cap to
didn't
the
come
amount
back-
of cities you could have either, so...
Exactly.
I specifically remember that happening on my server, and it was cool because they did it from a role play side of it. But the what were the red elves called? The sun elves or whatever.
I know. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
They actually had a name, but they were essentially the sun elves. There was a desert from the lore perspective, because they did this all in a role play perspective, which I thought was awesome. They literally took over the entire island and never let any. You couldn't get around because they took over every possible city. And I mean, we've seen it before, but yeah, continue. Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah. So my worry of that is, and I'm hoping they're not banking on it, of creating a system where they're banking on, I guess you could say, a lot of this aggressive behavior, breeding more conflict in the hope that people will come back for other reasons. I mean, if you wipe somebody's quote unquote in-game livelihood out, I think there's a fair chance that they don't just they just don't come back because they just had everything just taken away.
Right. It's actually funny you say that, because there's two examples I want to bring up. And we are getting really off topic on this one, but it actually kind of fits, and I love the discussion, this emergent discussion, so it all works, and it kind of fits with smuggling. The introductory video for another indie game called Crowfall talked about this. They set up the idea of a risk game that constantly would go on, that would just done year after year, and they talked about how the first year everyone was having fun, they were all establishing their position. It was great. But eventually, by year 2, one player, which they called Uncle Bob, started taking control. Well, some people left the game because they lost and they were done. Few people kept holding on, but, they weren't really into it. And in the video, it was funny because the first year, all the people are like, yeah, they're having fun. The next year, Uncle Bob's the one only having fun. Everyone else they're playing, but the guy's like looking at his phone. Oh, yeah, rolled it. Yeah, okay. Because he's knowing he's losing. By year 3, anyone who starts the game is pretty much losing because Uncle Bob has everything already, and they can't create a start. They can't do anything. And by year 5, Bob's the only one playing because everyone gives up, you know. And that's they went into how they're doing their game with characters being permanent but worlds not. It's fascinating. But then you also said the idea of people losing stuff. And I can't remember who said this comment, but it was actually really funny. They were talking about watching their young kid playing Minecraft, right? And I don't know if you played Minecraft on certain, not creator mode, the actual, that's pretty hardcore. You die, you lose everything. Everything you've done. And the kids are okay with that. They're just like, oh, whatever, and they go right back. At some point, we as human beings recognize the idea of loss and the idea of time, how long it took us to do it, and then we start to rationalize, is it worth it? Whereas the kid's like, whoop-de-doo, I died. All right, I'll just sit here with my...
Do it again.
Do it again. You know, that's part of the game. Where does that flip happen? Because eventually it does happen. And I liked when they said that, because when I listen, I'm like, this, what would be considered by us a hardcore death mechanic, complete loss of everything you own, is completely accepted by the super young. Only at a certain point do we go, oh, that's too hardcore for us, you know? Where you think it should have been the other way around, where we protect the children going, no, you don't lose everything. Instead, it's like, no, it's it.
I mean, I think Ashes is definitely going to do the right balance, though, of it when it comes to the... Because they've already talked about, like, when people were already, like, super upset about when sieges happen and the possibility of losing their freehold. Steven's already, like, you know, calmed them down by saying, well, yeah, okay, you might lose your freehold, but, like, everything and, like, how it's placed and set up is basically fine whenever you go to a new area, right?
Yeah.
And you establish your stuff. I think that's kind of the better way to go about it. Like, you may lose that valuable land of where you are in that node, but you don't lose everything. You just lose the time set up that it takes to get.
Well, you don't even lose that. I mean, you get the template. You could literally put it back down once you have the land again.
Right, as long as, like, the resources and everything else you have, or whatever the case may be.
Because I know the ESO housing, people spend hours. I mean, hours and hours setting up their house. If it were able to be destroyed, and I'm like, I just put 40 hours into decorating that thing, or whatever the case may be, you may not want to do it again. But if you're able to save a template where it's like, oh, I lost the house, pop back. Oh, look, there's my random bird I placed in a tree. Nice, you know. You're losing some of that loss. All right, let's continue with this email because we got to get back to smuggling. The idea of a smuggler, what if they had an icon color name or a colored name that was only visible by the contracted node citizens so that the players knew that the smuggler was helping their cause and kept them from attacking on site? So if you're smuggling, should you have some sort of indicator that you are helping versus in hindering?
No.
I'm actually with you. No, I would hope not.
I was gonna say I hope not either, just because it then if you knew that they were a smuggler and they're helping your cause, you would just rally troops and protect that
Sure.
goods that were coming there, right? And then and it no longer is that really high risk, high reward scenario. It's still risky, but you're going to get reinforcements or whatever the case may be. So it's not gonna be the exact same risk versus reward.
Yeah.
I think that you would need.
Plus, I kind of like the idea of, in my head, I'm thinking of the Silmarillion when oh crud, Belwin's gonna kill me for not remembering the name. Turin was kidnapped by the orcs, and his friend Belig came to help him, but it was at night, and he had just been tortured by the orcs for hours. So of course he's trying to cut Turin out of the bonds that he was tied to, and the knife slipped. And he accidentally nicked him. Turin woke up from a start, and it was dark out and lightning and everything, and he assumed the orcs had come back to torture him some more. He grabbed the sword from Beleg's hand and killed him. I just think that's funny. And then the other elf who happened to be with Beleg was like, dude, that was your friend. And Turin's like, oh, crud. Well, obviously he was a lot more depressed, but more or less it came to a point of, dude, he was helping you. And you're like, oh, my bad. My bad, guys. You know, I like that idea. I don't think that they should have any kind of indicator because, A, that kind of creates this whole idea of like the spy kind of deal, like, oh, the smuggler's working, so it's between party A and party B. It's up to party A if they want to tell everybody. But then what if they tell everyone, don't attack Alpha Soul? He's a good guy.
Yeah.
But somebody they told, Gundle's working for me. Gundle goes, dude, Alpha Soul's betraying you. Like, I'm an inside guy in here, and he just told us not to attack this guy, so he's doing something fishy. I like the idea of, if there's a color, then if I'm not in the area, then maybe I wouldn't know, or Gundle wouldn't know because he just never saw Alpha Soul. I'm sorry, there's a lot of players. But if you have to actually go and tell people, do not attack Alpha Soul, then the spies will go, oh, we got a turncloak in the mix, and they could relay that information. So you have to decide as party A, do I want to tell people about the smuggler, or do I just want to let it go?
Yeah.
All right.
Then you can have your covert missions that way, which I think reads that whole thing into more of a interesting concept.
Sure. Yeah. What if the smuggler's node ruler had an option to investigate a player if they were suspected him or her of being a smuggler? If they found out to be a smuggler, maybe they could... Hey, we just talked about this. Be exile, tax, property seized, lower trading ground for his node, or have an icon color name change so that only smuggler citizen could see, and that they could choose to attack on site for a bounty. We just talked about this, so we answered that earlier in the show. We thought it was off topic, but apparently it wasn't. Wow, that just worked out for us. I like that. All right. What if there was a black market like the Elder Scrolls Stolen Goods? From a player perspective, I don't know why you wouldn't want... Why would an item, right? Let's think of this from a player perspective. If we're not at war, right, what's the point of smuggling? Why would I ban a good from entering our area unless it was something like you wanted to deprive someone economically of a certain good?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe then I don't know. Alpha Soul's node has the only mithril mine in area. He's trying to sell to Gundle and I, but Gundle and I are planning to attack later. So we say, nope, we're not accepting any trade routes from him, so he can keep his... He could sit on his mithril and, maybe eat it when the siege begins if he wants, because we're not buying it. But then, I don't know, Stormlords from, his crafter point, like, but dude, that's cutting into my profits. I sell mithril swords, and now I can't get mithril to make them. So what do? That's the only thing from a player perspective is, why would you not want an item in your city unless you were trying to starve another city of their resources or of their income by stifling trade? And that is generally a precursor to an attack.
Black market also kind of... Like, as much as I like the black market, it does hinder the regional aspect of markets as well, because you have a secondary market that would be linked to a different node, if that was the case, right? If I'm understanding the black market. Right?
That's actually something pretty funny. I didn't even think about that. What if you could set up a black market for goods in a node that you could ally to another node, so that node A doesn't get taxes taken from it. So, I mean, it could be either one of two ways. A, players could set up a black market to sell. It would be free of taxes. So, the person would not, or the node would not get tax revenue off any sales. Automatically that's one non-warring node area. Adding the warring nodes, what if you could set up a black market that people could buy and sell from that benefited another node? I almost could see like that one. This option 2 would probably be kind of hard to set up, because again, then you're kind of suspending the disbelief of faster. Like, how did you get the resources there in the first place, and how did no one notice? Like, how are they collecting these taxes? But I could see a black market being the tax-free, place you went to, so that way people could sell stuff at a premium, because it would still be cheaper than, I'm gonna sell. This sword's 100 gold. Well, they take 20% tax on it, so the vendor gets 80 gold. Well, that sucks. Whereas the vendor could go, I'll sell it for 100 gold down here, or I could sell it for 115 and still get, you know, for cheaper than what you could pay up there once you pay taxes too. Because that's 100 gold, you'd have to pay 120 up top because you got to pay that 20% tax if it's applied to the purchaser, not the buyer, or the purchaser, not the seller.
Yeah.
It all depends how it's applied.
Black market could work in the context of you doing that, but the caravan system would have to be initiated and the risk and reward would still be there.
Sure.
Moving the goods. That's the only way I could see it working, because once again, you're moving goods from one node to another node. And like you said, if they don't do it with the caravan or something in that place, you're literally fast traveling items. The other option is it destabilizes the markets in the sense of, you know, your regional market, because then why would anybody put anything on the regional market of your node rather than the black market where they're going to make more money? Because
the node leadership would fight you.
Right, exactly, right. But then at what point, when if you do it right in that context, the black market, if enough people and enough citizens do it, the node leadership couldn't fight those people because they would start to lose the citizens, so their contributions to the node wouldn't take place. So then whatever like the node needs to sustain itself would start to decrease, and they'd start to either de-level or whatever the case may be.
But I mean, so, you could also tie that into the fact that then maybe the leadership has to look at it going, maybe 20% tax rate isn't acceptable. You know, because you also got to remember, citizenship means that you're tied to that node for a reason. So, yeah, people could pack up and leave, but that's kind of like Alpha Soul. You hate the area you're at. Okay, well, that means you have to pack up and leave everything right now, so you have to leave all your stuff because, you know, you're homeless now. Do you put up with the unfair taxes? Do you, you know, like, you could go to the black market, but if they shut it down, it's like, what do? You leave everything you have because you're tied to that area. You have, you know, your house, you all this stuff, but you would have to give that up and leave. Right?
Yeah.
So players have just as much of investment in a node as the leadership does for keeping players there. So if players are opening a black market, it's probably because they're not happy with, they don't want to give up what they have, but they also don't like the tax rate or whatever tariffs or whatever that the management has. So if they're seeing that there's a large black market presence, maybe they need to look at their tax rate and go, well, maybe I should lower it so there's not such a desire to use a black market.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of tricky because if you're, you know, by nature, if you're setting up a black market, and, you know, we're going up and we're creating these nodes and we're living through them as they're growing, chances are I'm going to know every single building vendor in our specific node, right? So if there's something that's kind of out there, then, you know, it's...
No, it's possible, but what if, like I'm saying is, it might be harder to find. Like if it's just one person's vendor, are you going to check every vendor every day? Maybe it's an interface kind, because it's kind of like in real life. How do you know the person's paying their taxes? Well, they submitted their forms. How did people do it before? They went up to the vendor, all right, you're being taxed on everything you sold. How much did you sell? I sold one thing this entire year. Really? You have this massive market stall. People are always here, and you sold, yep, that's all I have on the books.
Gotcha.
I mean, that's kind of how they got away with it in the past. They just lied about it, like, because that's how taxes were done, at least in Roman and medieval times. It was based on what you produced in most cases until they refined some of the tax laws, but we won't get into that. But, you know, it's what you produced. What prevents you from just saying, I didn't produce, I had a bad year. Man, it looked like you had a buster year. Nope. Locusts. I didn't see any locusts. Oh, they were terrible. Ate everything and left in one night. It was like magic. You know.
See, that brings up another kind of thing about smuggling that I actually just was thinking about. It may not even be in the context of actually like hidden goods or whatever the case may be. They might just see a market that is in need of said items, and they have an abundance of it, and they boost that economy that way. It like you're just influxing the amount of, I don't know, say like iron ore, because we'll just use that, The one node is severely lacking that iron ore because they're nowhere near a vein.
Sure.
And that way you could have your role as a smuggler without being an actual smuggler with all of these ties, right? Just by using the caravan system properly. And I think that's probably more or less what Steven and crew will probably expect people to do, because because your regional markets are going to be so refined in the sense that, oh, okay, well, you know, these are the things that spawn in our area, so this is the stuff we gather, this is stuff we create, and over, you know, across the continent, it'll be a whole bunch of different stuff. So if they're lacking iron ore and you know that, you can exploit that because of the travel and the distance. So you're not necessarily a smuggler in the sense that you're going in during a siege, but you would just be influxing that economy and boosting that economy through that, and that's just normal trade routes. I think is probably more or less on how they plan on doing that. So I guess you could quote unquote call yourself a smuggler by boosting something, and especially if during a siege or leading up to a siege, if they're lacking iron ore for the walls or whatever because they're nowhere near that, you can bring that all in from your node across the continent if you really wanted to, potentially, and get a huge premium. But it'd be through the normal system way where you wouldn't have to go through these theory crafted versions that we've kind of come up with. I think that's kind of what they're more or less going to probably rely on, because one, it makes the systems work properly, two, the risk and reward with the distance, and then three, it would be that whole thing, you wouldn't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy depending going in towards the caravan. So I think that's kind of where they'd probably leave it.
Sure. Cool. All right. I think that's the end of the questions. I'll read the last bit of his email to kind of get his thing in here. So my ideas are based on thinking a player that wanted to be a spy, perhaps. I think that if there is going to be a type of government, there should be an option to undermine, spy, or generally have a different political view than your ruler. I think a living political environment can open so many possibilities with groups, clans, etc. That's from Mike Thomas. Thank you so much, Mike. Sorry it took so long to get your email, both Mike and Archon from Germany. There you go. Thank you so much. You guys are great. Again, if you're interested in sending us a mail, I do encourage that. DungeonCrawlerNetwork.com. You can head to the top of the page, contact us, and leave us a message, and we will do our best to get to it, because this was fun. I actually had a lot of fun hammering these out.
Yeah.
All right, guys, it is the end of the show once again. So let's go ahead and do our outros, where people can find us. We're going to start with our guest, as always, Gundle.
So the easiest way to get a hold of me is going to be through the forums, which is just simply Gundle, or on Discord, which is Gundle 1880. So leader of Mythic. So the main thing about Mythic is we are a hardcore raid guild, centralizing around world firsts and server firsts. Firstly, our second and third primaries are going to be crafting and PvP alongside that. We have an open channel for anybody that wants to just come in and talk about Ashes with theory crafting, just kind of like how Aggelos has his with DCN. And come and chat with us, get a feel for the guild itself, and then you can always DM me privately if you want to talk about joining.
All right. Alpha Soul, where can people find you?
Did you say Alpha? Sorry.
Yeah, I said Alpha.
Oh.
We finished Gundle. I mean, I don't know who else is left.
Yeah, good point. So I can be found on Discord in the Hands of Fate channel, and I can also be found on my YouTube channel, which is YouTube /DRACDOC, Drakdoc.
There you go. I'm Aggelos, and you can follow me on Twitter at Aggelos, AGGELOS_DCN. And of course, we have our guild Hands of Fate, which is the Ashes of Creations chapter of the Dungeon Crawler Network, a gaming community forged by the listeners of our gaming podcast. We have created an amazing gaming community and family, so you should come be a part of it. We cover a wide range of gaming preferences, from PC to console. We have developed a community that ranges from the super casual to the cutting edge of hardcore players, and we strive to create an environment environment where we can support all play styles while we enjoy each other's company. Our guild is a PVX guild based on the North American Data Center with players from all over the world. We have scheduled events for each region's prime time. So if you're an EU or Oceanic resident but have enjoyed playing with us in the past, or maybe even for the very first time, we encourage you to join. Our guild's focus is on progression rating, small-scale PvE, crafting, gathering, node-based PvP, aka the open world, and of course, growing this awesome community that we love so much. Of course, you can join us over on our Discord, the Dungeon Crawler Network Discord, which is in the link below, even if you don't want to join our guild and just talk about Ashes of Creation. You can also follow everything we do over at dungeoncrawlernetwork.com. There you can find links to all of our social media, including Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Be sure to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/dungeoncrawlernetwork. If you want to help support the show, you can also consider leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes so people know that we're a real podcast, that we say real words, and sometimes it matters. Thank you for joining us on this episode of From the Ashes, and we'll see you next time. See you later, everybody.